We'll now move on to oral questions put by members to ministers. The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yesterday in the House, I asked the Premier a series of questions about the lobbyist registry, and the Premier made a great fuss about having been cleared by the RCMP. Personally, I think the Premier's office should never be investigated by the RCMP. That should be the standard. But my question for the Premier is, does the Premier really believe that having Nova Scotians have to discover who he met with and then ask the RCMP for an investigation, is that the best way for Nova Scotians to learn who the Premier is being lobbied by?
The Honourable Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to thank the Honourable Member for the question. Just for clarification, Mr. Speaker, the Premier's office was never investigated by the RCMP. If the Honourable Member actually followed it instead to look for a political point, he would recognize they were looking at former Prime Minister Chrétien, not the Premier's office of Nova Scotia.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, the Premier can split hairs all he wants, but we know that the RCMP investigated and the Premier met with him. That's not good process. Nova Scotians need a process that works. And in response to many questions, the Premier has indicated that we can't have more scrutiny in the form of a lobby registry because of the need for secrecy in getting deals done. That the Premier has hinted that if there is even the minimum level of scrutiny, there would be no way that this province could negotiate with anyone. Mr. Speaker, I feel much stronger about the opportunities for this province than to say something like that. There's a process the Feds use. The Feds are open to a little bit of scrutiny. The Premier's office should be as well. I'd like to ask the Premier, what gets discussed in those meetings that the Premier feels couldn't be discussed if he was working under the same rules as the federal government?
The Honourable Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In his preamble, the Honourable Member said the Premier is splitting hairs. Let me be frank, Mr. Speaker. The Premier is being truthful, stating the facts as they lie, Mr. Speaker. It may not matter to the Honourable Member when he stands in his place to be accurate and factual, but it actually matters to me.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, the Premier had to meet with the RCMP over a meeting that he conducted, and it's entertaining to see the Premier speak of himself in the third party, but we know that he third person. The Premier often says that the lobbyist rules are working. And they may be working for the Premier, but they're not working for any Nova Scotian that's trying to find out a basic level of information. Government should not be afraid to operate in the open. The Premier says he's worried about being scooped by other provinces. But really, if we're the best place for a deal to happen, then we're the best place for a deal to happen. Does the Premier feel that Nova Scotia needs to have weak lobbying rules in order to be competitive?
The Honourable Premier.
Mr. Speaker, I want to thank the Honourable Member for the question. Mr. Speaker, as he would know, a population is all-time high. More young Nova Scotians are choosing to live in this province and stay here, Mr. Speaker. We're seeing the amount of investments from global companies, Mr. Speaker, and I want to tell you, Mr. Speaker, yesterday, 80 young Nova Scotians, 80 grade 8 students in Nova Scotia were grateful for the fact, Mr. Speaker, that I took a meeting with IBM, that I made sure that Nova Scotia was the only Canadian jurisdiction that IBM's invested in to provide them, Mr. Speaker, not only with a good education next year, but a job 6 years from now, Mr. Speaker, in this province. And you're right, I did not want to be scooped by Ontario or Quebec. I wanted to make sure that it happened in our province. That's why we're leading the country, and we'll continue to do so.
The Honourable Leader of the New Democratic Party.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The night before last, nurses at the QE2 emergency department were calling on the hospital to declare a state of alert that's usually reserved for incidents where there are mass casualties. At one point over the night, there were 99 patients in the department, with just 3 doctors on rotation and 3 fewer RNs than required. By 4 a.m. yesterday morning, 42 patients had left the emergency department without being seen by a doctor. Mr. Speaker, when is the Premier going to see the need to open new nursing home beds, get alternate level of care patients into the facilities where they need to go, take the pressure off hospitals, and restore some sanity to patient flow?
The Honourable Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to thank the honourable member for the question. Yesterday, he would know through the Health Committee that we're very proud of the fact we're the first government in the history of our province to actually put the Health Committee together. That was televised, so Nova Scotia could watch from one end of the province to the other. EHS recognized and came in and talked about some of the challenges. They also recognized the Minister of Health. Sent a directive that they believe they'll see substantive changes in the coming months that will improve the very thing he's talking about, patient flow. But I also want to say to the honourable member, we're doubling long-term care beds in New Waterford and in Northside, Mr. Speaker. The very initiative that we're talking about, the honourable member is opposed to the
Order, please. The honourable Premier.
Mr. Speaker, it's Friday morning. Everyone's pretty excited in here. Mr. Speaker, the fact of the matter is we'll continue to make sure that we provide long-term care beds, and I look forward to the honourable member's support as we continue to do that. Same time, the investments that we make in home care, which is providing more options for people to stay at home. And I look forward to the Minister of Finance tabling our budget on the 26th so we can actually make sure that we continue to make those improvements.
The Honourable Leader of the New Democratic Party.
The Premier speaks, Mr. Speaker, about what was learned from the Health Committee meeting yesterday. One of the things learned there was that the number of the 5 busiest hospitals in Nova Scotia who are today meeting the 20-minute ambulance offload standard is exactly 0. We also know that the alternate level of care patients in Nova Scotia, those waiting in hospital for placement in a nursing home, are doing so in our province 6 times longer than is the average for alternate level of care placement in any other province in the country. And I will table the source of that startling statistic. Will the Premier acknowledge, as medical professionals across the province are daily acknowledging, that a big part of the present patient flow crisis is being caused by how many people are being stuck for so long waiting in hospital to get into a nursing home?
The Honourable Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. He referred to the meeting yesterday, which I want to remind the honourable member we're the first party in the history of this province to actually put a health committee together. He would also know, if he was listening to that committee, Mr. Speaker, that the offload issue that he's referring to, the member from Northside will get a chance to stand up as the leader lets him. The reality of it, Mr. Speaker, the fact of the matter is, Mr. Speaker, if he was listening to that committee yesterday, it was said that this issue has been around since 2006-07. We recognize this is a serious issue. The minister went forward and put together a health committee. He would also know, if he was listening yesterday, that even the union, Mr. Speaker, even the union said yesterday, we are cautiously optimistic about the direction that went forward. I would hope the honourable member, as we stand here in this place, and I hear the member from New Waterford is yelling at me across the fall. I listened to her leader speak. I would respect if she would give me an opportunity to actually answer the question. The fact of the matter is, she has stood in her place, and so has her leader, complaining about long-term care beds. We're doubling those in her community. I wish she would stand up and support it, like healthcare providers will.
The Honourable Leader of the New Democratic Party.
Mr. Speaker, who we are listening to in this part of the House are the frontline healthcare providers who are providing all the emphasis about the existence of the crisis in the province, some of whom speak about how the night before last at the QE2 emergency department there were 7 critically ill patients, each of whom required one-on-one nursing, but there were only 4 RNs available on duty. They speak about how people worked straight through their 12-hour shifts all night without breaks and without food as they tried to bring some coherent shape to the crisis in the emergency department. Mr. Speaker, the NSHA has been relying on nurses working overtime to staff our hospitals, but filling shifts has become difficult since the Health Authority became more restrictive about paying nurses overtime rates for extra shifts. I want to ask the Premier, why doesn't the NSHA simply hire the nurses that are needed instead of subjecting the ones that we have to these untenable working conditions and chiseling them out of their overtime while they're at it?
The Honourable Premier.
Mr. Speaker, the reality of it is, Mr. Speaker, anyone in the healthcare profession, including the nurses who work overtime, get paid overtime, Mr. Speaker. The fact of the matter is, they do.
The Honourable Premier.
Mr. Speaker, fact of the matter is, if you work overtime in the healthcare system, you are paid for that overtime, Mr. Speaker. The reality of it is, Mr. Speaker, what the issue the honourable member brings to the floor of the legislature is an important issue. It's an important issue. It's why the Minister of Health continues to make sure that we continue to invest in nurse practitioners, continue to invest in our colleges, and particularly around providing more nurses in the province, why we continue to hire our graduates, Mr. Speaker, to continue to deal with the very issue he's talking about. We recognize there is more work to do, and I look forward to continuing to working with the Minister of Health and all of our partners to ensure that we make sure that the right complement of healthcare providers in all of our communities.
The honourable member for Northside Westmount.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I guess the Premier wants questions today, so I'll ask my question to the Premier instead of the Minister of Health. As I noted earlier this week, the exodus of ophthalmologists from Cape Breton is hitting a feverish pitch. I'm hearing from constituents who require ongoing glaucoma treatment and are getting very anxious. They can't afford or aren't able to travel to Halifax for follow-ups with an ophthalmologist, and they aren't covered if they need to see their local optometrist for treatment. The situation is worsening very quickly, and his government doesn't have any answers. So my question to the Premier is, how confident is he that their government will be able to recruit enough ophthalmologists to Cape Breton to keep glaucoma patients from paying out of pocket or leaving the island for treatment?
That's right, the Honourable Premier.
Mr. Speaker, I'm very confident, Mr. Speaker. I'm more confident in the fact that we can do that than the honourable member is in his own leader, Mr. Speaker. If you want to stand up in his place, go ahead and do what you're doing, Mr. Speaker. I'm very confident the Minister of Health will work with all of our partners, Mr. Speaker, to deliver health care not only on Cape Breton Island, but across our communities.
The honourable member for Northside Westmount.
Mr. Speaker, that's all fine and good, but my understanding is the Minister's department has had a letter sitting on his desk for 4 years with respect to this situation. 4 years, Mr. Speaker. It shouldn't be a surprise to this government, or are they just waking up to the fact that there's a crisis in healthcare? It's well past time for the Premier and the Minister to take some decisive action instead of blaming retirements on a crisis situation. This letter, Mr. Speaker, allows optometrists and ophthalmologists to work together to help ease the pain and burden on people with glaucoma. So my question is to the Premier, will he commit to having this government react to this letter in a timely manner so people in Cape Breton can receive the glaucoma treatment they need and deserve?
The Honourable Premier.
Mr. Speaker, I'll be happy to look at that letter and respond to it.
The Honourable Member for Halifax Needham. Order, please. The Honourable Member for Halifax Needham.
Mr. Speaker, my question is for the Minister of Municipal Affairs. The IPCC report says we need more ambitious action on climate change from every level of government. Here in Nova Scotia, municipalities have been doing their best to be leaders on climate change. Bridgewater is a great example. But municipal leaders say they need more support from the province. The federal government has made millions of dollars available for municipalities for action on climate change, but many of them don't even have the resources to get the applications done. Opportunity is passing us by when we need action now. Can the minister tell us that the upcoming budget will include significant dedicated funds so our municipalities can generate more clean energy, create green jobs, and reduce carbon emissions?
The Honourable Minister of Municipal Affairs.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And we realize across this province, right across the world, I think about climate change, and we're seeing the effects of those, Mr. Speaker, through the changing weather patterns, the intense storms, the sea level rise. Our Department of Municipal Affairs, Environment and Energy have been working together with our municipal partners right across this province to better understand the impacts of this, Mr. Speaker, and to identify strategies that we can adapt and help make changes as we need to. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Halifax Needham.
Mr. Speaker, the minister's answer is disappointing, especially today when high school students across the province are joining others around the world to protest the lack of government action on climate change. We need to be making serious, specific investments now. The Nova Scotia Federation of Municipalities has an ask on his desk that would go a long way to supporting local action on climate change. They are asking for just $63,000 from the province to help fund a staff position focused on sustainability. And that staff person would ensure that municipalities outside of the Halifax area can access federal money. Will the minister at the very least commit to funding that position to help Nova Scotia municipalities take action on climate change?
The Honourable Minister of Municipal Affairs.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank the honourable member for a question. We already offer a number of programs that municipalities can access, Mr. Speaker. We have examples, flood risk infrastructure programs. We have the federal program, which is a national disaster mitigation program, Mr. Speaker, and we continue to work on those. But I'm always open to having conversations with our partners about how we can do better around climate change. It's something this government continues to work on, Mr. Speaker. She mentioned the upcoming budget. We're quite looking forward to that and further improving jobs in the economy, Mr. Speaker, and the great things we're doing in the province of Nova Scotia. Thank you.
The honourable member for Cape Breton-Richmond.
Mr. Speaker, on February 25th, the Minister of Agriculture announced a $16.7 million frost loss program. The announcement comes over 8 months after a devastating frost that cost the agriculture sector over $34 million. Mr. Speaker, this program's deadline is today, March 15th, which provides just over 3 weeks for applicants to gather the information needed to complete an application. Many have said that they've only found out about this last week. Mr. Speaker, why did it take 8 months for the minister to respond to the needs of the agriculture sector when he knew about this problem and the losses they suffered last year?
The Honourable Minister of Agriculture.
Thank you very much. It's a very important question. And indeed, it took a long time for the industry and for our staff to evaluate the proper damage that was done by the severe frost and freeze, and it was a very short window to apply. We've had a lot of applications, and we're working with them. And as far as the notification's been, we notified the Federation of Agriculture. They notified all their members. We notified all the farming communities, so someone who only found out last week either didn't read their emails or didn't watch what was going on.
The honourable member for Cape Breton-Richmond.
Perhaps many of those farmers haven't read their emails because there's not enough cellular coverage and internet coverage in rural Nova Scotia, Mr. Speaker. A FOI prop obtained by our caucus reveals that the minister was briefed on the extent of the losses as early as June the 6th. Briefings were received regularly from Perennia from June onward. However, the minister waited until the 11th hour of this fiscal year to announce a program that could have alleviated significant burden on applicants 8 months ago. We hear anecdotal information that there is a large number of applicants, many requiring additional information. Mr. Speaker, will the frost loss program be extended for applicants to who, through no fault of their own, have submitted applications that are incomplete, require clarification, or are struggling to meet a last-minute announcement deadline?
The Honourable Minister of Agriculture.
Any application that's in the process, with complete or not complete, will be completed. As long as we have that information by the end of the year, they will fit into the program as long as they qualify.
The honourable member for Cumberland South.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my question is for the Minister of TIR. On December 8th, 2017, the Rainbow Bridge on Highway No. 2 in Napan was closed when 2 main cord members failed and the bridge began to sag. Shortly after that, it was determined that the bridge was no longer sound enough to carry traffic. Last summer, the span was removed. Tenders closed this past Wednesday, March 13th, for a new structure. I know it was only 2 days ago, but can the minister inform this House of when that tender may be awarded?
The Honourable Minister of Transportation.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I'm very pleased for the member to bring this matter forward. We are moving with intent on that major bridge replacement, and we would expect that that will be awarded before the end of this current month.
The Honourable Member for Cumberland South.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The tender states the contract must be completed by October 31st to avoid penalty. Residents who have traveled this area from Amherst to Spring Hill to Amherst or vice versa have had to wait 15 months. It's been a major inconvenience, and the regional hospital is on the other side of that bridge for my constituency. My question is to the minister. Can we expect work to continue this summer, have this bridge replaced, and will the minister come with me, cut the ribbon, and name that bridge as what the community has called for, the Roger Bacon Bridge? Thank you.
The Honourable Minister of Transportation.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I would be more than happy to accompany the member, and we'll take that recommendation under consideration. Thank you.
The honourable member for Cape Breton-Richmond.
Mr. Speaker, the Strait Richmond Hospital is in dire straits when it comes to coverage in the emergency department. ER closures are skyrocketing in my area. We have no ER physician listed on the NSHA job site online, and that's for the Strait Richmond and for St. Anne's. Instead, we're borrowing local doctors from other parts of Cape Breton and the mainland, and with shortages everywhere, there are often none to be found. From my attempts to get answers from the NSHA on how they intend to bridge this gap in a sustainable way, I've received no concrete action plan. Mr. Speaker, if local doctors are not willing to take these shifts and there are none in the bank to borrow elsewhere, what does the minister expect my constituents to do for emergency care?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As the member and the members of the legislature would know, indeed, the emergency care delivery is something that we take very seriously, Mr. Speaker. This is an area that we, along with our partners, Nova Scotia Health Authority, as well as EHS system, have been working diligently on evaluating and coming up with processes to improve the situation. The steps that we're taking, Mr. Speaker, are investing in recruitment initiatives, locum coverage to bring in temporary physicians to cover those shifts, Mr. Speaker. We've seen many shifts covered across the province since we've made changes to these programs in the fall, and Mr. Speaker, will continue to listen to frontline healthcare workers to make changes going forward.
The honourable member for Cape Breton-Richmond.
Mr. Speaker, the strategy that the Health Authority is pursuing to shore up emergency medicine in my area is not sustainable. It's not working. The NSHA's own recruitment criteria for family physician lists emergency medicine as an optional service. So, not only are we facing a shortage of emergency medicine physicians, but those that we're calling on to urgently fill the gap don't necessarily need to be emergency medicine specialists. Will the minister please look into the clear deficiency in the way that the NSHA plans to recruit and retain emergency physicians at the Strait Richmond Hospital and at St. Anne's?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The member noted exactly what the NSHA's recruitment initiative is recruiting, as we've talked about for the last, since my time in office, Mr. Speaker, focus on recruiting primary care physicians to communities across the province, Mr. Speaker. That work is part of strengthening our access to primary care, which helps keep people out of emergency departments, Mr. Speaker, when the primary care needs are being met. That's been a focus, Mr. Speaker, of the NSHA and of this government, and for the last 4 months, Mr. Speaker, we've seen fewer Nova Scotians registering needing access to a primary care physician. That's showing that the initiatives that we've been putting in place are working.
The honourable member for Dartmouth North.
Mr. Speaker, my question is for the Minister of Environment. On Tuesday, this government told the Supreme Court that it has, and I quote, no position on whether the police should be directed to remove the Sebenegatick water protectors from their Treaty Truck House, where they are protesting the Alton Gas project, and I'll table that. It is disappointing to see our government try to wash its hands of a situation that it is responsible for creating. We have been waiting a year for the minister to issue her decision on Sebenegatick on their appeal of the project's approval. Why is the minister allowing work on the project to proceed and create conflict while we wait for her decision?
The Honourable Minister of the Environment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank the honourable member for this question. Certainly, we have been involved with the Alton Gas project. We have a valid environmental assessment that has gone forward. They also have an industrial approval with terms and conditions on their approval. Our staff monitor that approval. The issue with Sebenegatick and the Alton Gas site. This is certainly an issue between a private landowner and law enforcement. It's not something that the department needs to be involved with. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Dartmouth South.
The minister had the option of putting a pause on the project until the appeal process is resolved, but she did not. She is allowing the work to continue, even though the Supreme Court of Nova Scotia directed her 2 years ago to make a decision on the appeal. When a First Nation appeals a project approval but government allows that project to move forward anyway, I'd say that flies in the face of reconciliation. Will the minister acknowledge that by failing to make a decision on the appeal and allowing the work to continue, that she is increasing the tensions between Alton Gas and Mi'kmaq water protectors?
The Honourable Minister of the Environment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you for that. I am well aware that there is still an appeal ready to, that can come forward. That decision's not ready to be made yet. When I feel confident that we have all the information we need and I can make that decision, I will. Thank you.
The Honourable House Leader for the Official Opposition.
Speaker, question for the Minister of Municipal Affairs. It's almost a couple of weeks ago, I looked at a copy of the Inverness Oran, and on the cover I read where the municipality was offering, I think it was $750,000 for the repair and reconstruction of a wharf on Port Hood Island. And in the story, they had indicated that the municipality had made their contribution and they were waiting to hear from the province and the federal government, which would suggest that an application had been made to the province. Can the minister confirm if the municipality actually applied for provincial infrastructure funding on behalf of Port Hood Island residents and others who use that wharf?
The Honourable Minister of Municipal Affairs.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And the application or the issue that the member has raised, I'm not familiar with. So I can't confirm at this moment, but I'm not familiar and don't recall ever seeing any such application.
The Honourable House Leader for the Official Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, thank you. I wonder if the minister can confirm if individuals or community organizations can apply for this type of funding from his department, or if the program is only open to municipalities who may apply on behalf of their residents.
The Honourable Minister of Municipal Affairs.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The application process is generally driven by municipalities who set their priorities regardless of what they may be. Specific to wharfs, though, Mr. Speaker, just for the honourable member and others' information, I don't believe there is a program specific to wharfs that currently exists at this time. There may be in the future, but I don't believe there's anything currently available. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Colchester, Musqueam Valley.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is for the Minister of Education. The Halifax Regional Centre for Education is the public school district responsible for all the elementary, junior high and senior high schools located in the Halifax Regional Municipality. In December, a constituent called the HRCE to report an issue located near the Upper Musqueam Consolidated Elementary School. The response was, we have a school in Middle Musqueam, but not one in Upper Musqueam. Is that the one you're referring to? Anyway, it was a surprise response. So my question for the minister is, are inventory controls regularly reviewed and updated, and are the new hires required to learn about the inventory that their department is responsible for?
The Honourable Minister of Education.
Yes, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Colchester, Musqueam Valley.
Oh, that was quick. Now, the issue itself is not that important. There was a runoff water from a ditching failure at the school, and it was fixed, pretty quickly. I'm just concerned that rural facilities are not given the same attention, I guess, as some others. Now the schools are the direct responsibility of the department. Can the minister tell the House what preventative measures and procedures are in place to assure that maintenance checks are being conducted on a regular basis?
The Honourable Minister of Education.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. There's ongoing maintenance checks. There's ongoing cataloging of maintenance needs and major capital needs. So each year, the regions will compile an operational list of their biggest capital and maintenance priorities, submit that list to the department for consideration. Our ability to respond to those pressures are consistent, or are based on our financial capacity to do so. We do our very best with the money we have to tackle the greatest and most significant needs in the system each and every year.
The Honourable Member for Cumberland North.
Mr. Speaker, in 1995, the Highway 104 Western Alignment Act was established. It is an act to provide for financing, construction, and operation of the western alignment of Highway 104, otherwise known as the Cobequid Pass. In the Act, it states in Section 13.2, tolls shall cease to be imposed or collected when all costs and liabilities relating thereto have been paid. In honour of the late Honourable Ron Russell, laid to rest this week, I'd like to table a document dated December 18, 2003, signed by the late Mr. Russell that states, quote, excess cash is to be used to reduce the corporation debt by prepayment of the bonds, end quote. Because of the Ham government, the debt and liabilities are scheduled to be paid off in full in 2019. My question to the Premier is, will he honour the Highway 104 Western Alignment Act and honour the great people of Colchester and Cumberland counties and remove the tolls in 2019?
The Honourable Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, this issue has been raised in the House a number of times. We continue to work with our partners to ensure that we continue that piece of highway. I'm looking forward to the new P3 highway that's going to be the rest of the 104 that's dealing with the Barneys River portion. That's going to be an important part. And like every decision, Mr. Speaker, we as a government will continue to review them, and we will, by all means, tell not only her but all those in Cumberland and Colchester County, Mr. Speaker, and all Nova Scotia to travel those highways if and when those tolls are to be removed.
The Honourable Member for Cumberland North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And we would like the Premier to honour the Act, which states that the tolls should cease and be removed once the debt is paid. And according to the financial documents, which I'll table, the debt and liabilities are scheduled to be paid off in 2019. And I would like the Premier to give his word and do this, and I'm asking if he would be willing to give his word today to the people of Colchester and Cumberland counties to remove the tolls this year.
The Honourable Premier.
Mr. Speaker, I'm looking forward, Mr. Speaker, to reviewing the document she laid, which I've seen many times. I want to tell her we'll continue to follow this process. We'll continue to make what is in the best interest of the motor and public in the province of Nova Scotia. Any decision that we make will be about how we continue to invest. And I'm sure she'll be happy to recognize when the Minister of Finance stands up next Tuesday, the 26th. We've delivered our fourth balanced budget, Mr. Speaker, with the investments that we're continuing to make. The Minister of Transportation stood up yesterday, talked about the major investments we're making in highways. And I want to assure the honourable member that Cumberland and Colchester counties will be an important part of we continue to make those investments.
The honourable member for Queens Shelburne.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is for the Minister of Fisheries and Aquaculture. Residents in Queens Shelburne continue to have concerns about the operations of Cook Aquaculture. On February the 28th, truckloads of fish were removed from the Coffin Island site in Liverpool. On March 14th at 8:41 p.m., Cook Aquaculture sent an email stating their staff are removing deceased salmon this week from the site in Liverpool, and I'll table that, Mr. Speaker. So I'd like to ask the Minister, when was his department notified of the latest fish kill at Coffin Island site?
The Honourable Minister of Fisheries and Aquaculture.
Thank you very much. We're aware of that situation, and we continue to investigate it, and our vets were on site recently.
The Honourable Member for Queens Shelburne.
Mr. Speaker, my question was, when was the department made aware of that fish kill? Mr. Speaker, this isn't the first time Cook Aquaculture has experienced significant mortality events in Queens Shelburne. Cook Aquaculture has now made applications for 2 new sites in our beautiful Liverpool Bay and an expansion of the Coffin Island site. Many constituents are concerned, even though the Minister talks of greater transparency in the process. Now that the application has been made and the department will conduct its technical review, will the Minister commit to releasing all of that information to residents of Queens Shelburne?
The Honourable Minister of Fisheries and Aquaculture.
Thank you very much for the question. We have a complete regulatory process in place around aquaculture sites. It's very rigid now. The companies have reporting responsibilities, which they did do to the community this time. This mortality, it's not a kill, it's a mortality as a weather event, and we were investigating that. As far as information around the applications are concerned, there's a whole process around that. That will go to a private or independent review panel to review all that information. It's the responsibility of the company to make sure that that information is provided. and the community will have a chance for having input at that point.
The honourable member for Dartmouth South.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is for the Minister of Business. Nova Scotia needs green jobs. We need a plan to get a clean economy. Tens, if not hundreds of thousands of students will be marching at noon today to demand that. But I don't see any evidence that this government has a plan. For 6 years, our employment growth has been sluggish compared to the rest of the country. Our incomes are stagnant while prices are going up. Outside of Halifax, we're losing jobs, almost 9,000 of them since 2013. Oil and gas jobs have disappeared since 2012, and while there may be a few small booms left in the industry, the outlooks say it's mostly a bust. Nova Scotia needs a plan, a green jobs plan. Can the minister tell this House why he has no comprehensive strategy to create the thousands of good green jobs we need in Nova Scotia?
The Honourable Minister of Business.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the member for the question, the House Leader for the NDP. It certainly is part of the mix. It is part of the conversations around green jobs. The new economy is built on renewable energies, the infrastructure, and the systems that will be required to sustain that infrastructure. Mr. Speaker, there's been 1,400 jobs associated with the green economy thus far across the province, which certainly we'll see grow exponentially over the next number of years because it has to. Nova Scotia is going to be a leader. We're a leader in reduction of GHGs. We're going to be a leader in the green economy as well, doing it smart, prudently, and making sure that we're hiring people and we're providing energy that's in the best interest of the province.
The Honourable House Leader for the New Democratic Party.
Mr. Speaker, I thank the minister for his answer, but with respect, being part of the mix is not enough. This government has had 6 years to make a real impact, but we have not made significant progress on the major challenges facing Nova Scotians. I'm sure the minister will argue that there isn't a silver bullet to create good jobs, revitalize rural communities, cut emissions, and make our communities cleaner and healthier. But there is. There actually is. It's major public investment with a clear strategy and a triple bottom line return on investment that is democratic and invites participation from all over the province. That's what a green jobs plan is. But since this government doesn't have one, I'd like to know, Mr. Speaker, can the minister tell us when we will see a comprehensive green jobs plan, or will we let Nova Scotians continue to fall behind as the world economy moves on without us?
The Honourable Minister of Business.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And again, I thank the member for the question. I would respectfully disagree. I think we are leaders. We're leaders in the development of the green sector. And Mr. Speaker, I think that to the member's point, everything that we do in terms of government investment, the green economy, renewables, how we grow, the new age of energy is part of the mix. And then every investment is connected to the new direction that we're heading. We're creating jobs with a $700 million capital plan, Mr. Speaker. We're creating jobs. We're giving up. Thanks, Premier. We're building a leading broadband program that exists nowhere else, which will provide access for rural Nova Scotians to participate in the new green economy. And unemployment at an all-time low where we are now. Mr. Speaker, and of course, we're going to continue to make good decisions, make smart investments, continue to support the tourism sector, and the list keeps on going, but I got to sit down. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Pictou Centre.
Sounds like a leadership contender to me.
Mr. Speaker, my question is for the Minister of Health. Mr. Speaker, all members of this legislature better call me again.
The Honourable Member for Pictou Centre will start again.
Mr. Speaker, my question is for the Minister of Health. Mr. Speaker, all members of this legislature deal from time to time with issues surrounding the pharmacare formulary. I have visits from constituents that were impacted upon turning 65 and having medication substituted to fall in line with the formulary. Recently, we experienced a case where an individual finally found meds to bring his diabetes under control. His physician was pleased, but this individual turned 65 and this medication is not on the formulary. The question to the Minister, does the Minister recognize that switching prescriptions like this isn't just an inconvenience, it is often risky?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the member for bringing this question to the floor on behalf of his constituent. I don't have specific details, but certainly we can connect on a specific case if he has one. But in generalities, how our pharmacare program works, Mr. Speaker, it does have a formulary that covers prescription drugs. As far as clinical concerns, Mr. Speaker, when it comes to most pharmaceutical drugs, there are generic versions. They are essentially the same drugs, but at a much cheaper rate. Those are often what are given preference on our formulary to ensure that we can provide more coverage to more Nova Scotians at an affordable rate while providing the same clinical and meeting the same clinical requirements for patients.
The Honourable Member for Pictou Centre.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my office is aware of the special exceptions process and my constituent followed it. Nevertheless, it took almost a full year before his needs were recognized and his medications were covered. During this year period, however, he paid the money from his pocket to remain on this medication. Not everyone has that option. The question to the Minister, we are aware of the extraordinary costs involved with this pharmacare program. However, in situations like this, how does the Minister justify short-term savings against the risk posed by the substitute medications?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As the member noted, the pharmacare program does provide for consideration for pharmaceutical coverage that is clinically necessary that may not fall under our standard formulary. Mr. Speaker, that process does exist to take into account situations like the members highlighted. But in the general terms, Mr. Speaker, we do have a formulary providing coverage for Nova Scotians with a number of different pharmacare programs, including the Seniors Pharmacare Program and the Family Pharmacare Program, Mr. Speaker, that Nova Scotians are eligible to apply for and receive drug coverage.
The Honourable Member for Argyll-Barrington.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I'll ask my first question to the Minister of Mines and Energy. I think we all put up more of an emphasis on doing the green thing than we have in the past. We tend to make more efficient decisions, from recycling cans and bottles to driving cars with better gas mileage. And some of my community have been asking how government makes decisions about greening of new infrastructure. As government plans and executes new construction in our communities, how does the Minister's Department get involved to ensure that these new buildings have all the green technologies that we can afford?
The Honourable Minister of Mines and Energy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to thank the member for the question and some conversations we've had of late in projects in his constituency. We have a number of programs that we offer through the department to support Nova Scotians that employ hundreds of Nova Scotians around the province. Specific to his request, the program that we offer is the Low Carbon Communities Program. So this is an opportunity for communities across the province to apply for projects, whether it's for infrastructure or whether it's for connecting communities or it's with our Mi'kmaq communities with solar projects. This is really the fund that we use to support those projects. So if there is a project coming forward that the minister or the member or any member of the House wants to talk about, we're happy to do it.
The Honourable Member for Argyll-Barrington.
I'll switch over to the Minister of Education, but I do want to thank the Minister of Mines and Energy for that answer. But we are getting a new school in the community of Wedgeport, and of course I want to thank the Minister of Education for that. You know, I've gotten a lot of questions lately about the greening of Ecole Wedgeport, and I've forwarded a number of these requests to the Minister, so I'll ask. I don't know which minister. You guys can decide what you want to do there. How will the Minister's Department be aiding the Department of Education with the greening initiatives for the Ecole Wedgeport project?
The Honourable Minister of Education.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Once the site selection process is completed, the community will be engaged in that process in a number of ways. We will head to a design consultation phase where the community can provide input to the design and the framing of the tender for the build. Part of that will be green. We'll have green components as a part of that competitive bidding process, so that will be something that we do evaluate, take into consideration when we eventually provide the award for that tender. And Mr. Speaker, I appreciate the member's comments. All it took to get a school in Wedgeport finally was a Liberal government, and I appreciate him recognizing that. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Pictou West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is for the Minister of Education. Pictou West is one of the very few constituencies in the province of Nova Scotia that has been overlooked with regards to the pre-primary program. And I've stated before in this chamber that the rollout of this program was rushed and unfair. It's been sold as a universal program, but not every child in Nova Scotia is getting the same start to their education, unfortunately. And, Mr. Speaker, you're only 4 once. So if you're not offered the program when you're 4, then you're falling behind the other 4-year-olds in the province. So my question to the Minister of Education is, when will he be implementing a pre-primary program in Pictou West?
The Honourable Minister of Education.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I'm continually amazed by the Conservative position on pre-primary. First, the party votes against it. The leader of the opposition.
Please, the Honourable Minister of Education has the floor.
The leader of the official opposition said if his party was in government, there would not be a pre-primary program. The members opposite continually attack the program, say it's rushed, that we're moving too quickly, and then in the other breath, Mr. Speaker, they asked us to move even quicker. That's hilarious, I think, Mr. Speaker. The application and rollout of pre-primary has been year over year. We have been ambitious. We have utilized the EDI information. It's been needs-based. The communities that have childcare deserts, where we know the needs of the students are high, and we go into those communities first, Mr. Speaker. We're at about half coverage right now, about 50%, and over the course of our mandate, we will reach 100% access, Mr. Speaker, to every single student family in this province.
The Honourable Member for Pictou West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We were never against the program. We were against the fact, no, we were against the fact that not every child was going to have the opportunity to start the program at the same time. I like your program. I like your program.
Please, the Honourable Member for Pictou West.
Has been Starting Blocks Daycare and Preschool in Pictou West has been operating for 25 years, employing 6 full-time teachers, and currently their facility meets the requirements for the primary program, unlike many of the actual schools that it's been introduced in. I'm aware of pilot programs happening at daycare facilities, and I actually wrote the minister requesting a visit to come to Pictou and have a look at the Starting Blocks facility, and I will table that letter, but I have not received a response back. So I would like to ask the minister if he will confirm today in the House that he will make arrangements to come to Pictou. I know he has stood up my colleague from Pictou Centre and Pictou East, but I'm hoping that he will come to Pictou and have a visit at the Starting Blocks Daycare with me to determine if this is a good location.
The Honourable Minister of Education.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The record is very clear on the members opposite. It's recorded in this House. Their votes, their comments on pre-primary, and the leader of the opposition's comments saying that if he was in government, there would not be a pre-primary program, is a matter of the public record and not to be debated in this House, Mr. Speaker. What I will tell the member is, despite the lack of ambition...
Please, the Honourable Minister of Education.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Despite the lack of ambition that the Conservatives have for 4-year-olds, for young people in this province, which I think is indicative of a lack of ambition for this province, we will move forward and make sure that every single 4-year-old has access to this program, including 4-year-olds in Pictou County, despite what the position of those members has been.
The Honourable Member for Sydney River Myra Lewisburg.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And heading into a long weekend, I can't imagine why everybody is so testy.
Are you sure
Mr.
your
Speaker,
seatmate doesn't have a question?
Is for the Minister of TIR. Mr. Speaker, I would like to start off first by thanking the Minister for a tender that was issued earlier this week for some roads in my constituency. I've heard back from a number of people that are going to be affected by those tenders, and they're quite pleased about it being called. But I've also heard, Mr. Speaker, from a number of other residents on other roads that are wondering when their turn is going to come. And I'm just wondering if the minister would
give some consideration to the Front Lake Road, Caribou Marsh Road, the Morrison Road, and the Birch Grove Road. Mr. Speaker, those are roads that are being impacted by poor road conditions, and I would hope I would even be willing to take the minister on another drive if that would help.
Honourable Minister of Transportation.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the member opposite for the question. And anytime I get to visit the beautiful riding that he represents, I really enjoy it. I spent some time there, and I appreciate his kind comments about the 15 kilometres of paving that is in tender for that particular riding. One of the largest, longest paving projects that we have for this year. And in terms of the list of roads that he has suggested, those are all good candidates, are as many good candidate roads across the province. We have a very scientific process for determining where the money is spent, and I am absolutely shocked that he has not mentioned the New Boston Road.
Thank you very much. Time allotted for oral questions put by members to ministers has expired.